The American Revolt. Whilst historians still debate exactly what occurred, by my analysis the British failed to fully follow their policy completely in the 13 colonies of North America. A failure which led directly to the collapse of the American Empire and humiliation which has overshadowed Crown policy ever since. At first, this was a simple miscalculation. French interest in North America grew far faster than expected, and when continental war spilled into North America, the cost of beating them back was considerable. The cost was passed on to the American colonists, before the colonies themselves felt represented in the Crown's administrative and government circles. Perhaps it was because of the superficial similarities between American colonists and their British subjects that convinced the Crown it could act more freely in dealings with America. Perhaps it was an error on the part of the colonial administrators not to realize the danger they were in. Whatever the cause, the American Revolt erupted in 1776 and the war raged until 1783. Referred to in the Union of Federated American States as the American Revolution and celebrated every 4th of July amongst the domains of the Crown's dominions, the events of 1776 are referred to as the Great Rebellion. Much blood and treasure was spent attempting to crush the American rebels, and even today the suspicion and mistrust bred by the conflict remain strong. The experience of the Great Rebellion also hardened British attitudes to the rest of the world. The intervention of France during the war on the side of the rebels soured the Crown's relations with foreign powers of all kinds. The fear that other powers might intervene in its affairs at the cost of wealth, lives, and influence led to the fourth principle. The realm shall not tolerate an equal, no power beyond dominions of the British Crown may claim to power or wealth sufficient to challenge the might of the Crown. The Prussian Wars. The fourth principle has governed all of the Crown's actions since the loss of their American territories. British naval power was extended across the globe to strangle foreign trade and force subservience on other mercantile powers. All claims of creating a Pax Britannica on behalf of all nations was nothing but propaganda to cover blatant imperialist aggression. Under the influence of their newfound determination to brook no challenge, the British government paid for more attention than usual to the affairs of the European powers in the 19th century. The rise of Napoleon was of great concern to the Crown, especially given the close links between revolutionary France and the former American colonies. This concern soon gave way to fears of Prussian dominance. With the entire continent of Europe transformed into a single armed camp, the British Isles safety could no longer be guaranteed, and the very heartland of the Crown would be under permanent threat. Whilst I have been able to confirm whether British fears of a Prussian invasion were well founded, the threat was sufficiently real, enough to provoke the Crown into action. Examiners note, all files from the period remain sealed by the Teutonic Instruction. The British declaration of war in 1813 certainly took early Imperium by surprise, concentrating, as it was, on the final defeat of the French Republic and the strategic disaster unfolding in the east. The flank march undertaken by the Duke of Wellington, who remains a national hero that led the Battle of Waterloo, is rightly studied, still at the Sandhurst Academy, and at our own War College in Berlin. Nonetheless, it is a perfect illustration of the British mindset, a short, limited campaign to achieve maximum strategic impact, destabilizing the foe and preventing them from achieving victory. Perfidious Albion. A sweeping overview of British policy since the Prussian Wars will reveal that the same pattern repeating itself over again. A potential threat to Crown dominance is identified and the opportune moment taken to strike and destabilize the threat before it becomes too powerful to resist. The last 50 years or so, British military power has been brought to bear against almost every major power and many smaller ones to preserve its military preeminence. In India, rebellious provinces have been suppressed with the help of local allies, and then against those same local allies with the support of the pacified Indian provinces. In Africa, War has been waged against various tribes, destabilizing some and absorbing others, before then attacking their former allies. Local powers, unable to secure the friendship of another European power, was frequently found themselves at the mercy of a crown gunboat diplomacy. In America, British military forces staged periodic spoiling attacks on Canadian soil early in the century, which then expanded into naval blockade of both sides. During the ensuing Civil War, there is good evidence to suggest that the Crown was instrumental in easing the passage of weapons of war and supplies to both sides. During that conflict, thanks to their dominance of worldwide trade in Asia, the sheer strength of the Celestian Empire has prevented the Crown from indulging in excessive displays of military force, with the exception of aggressively patrolling its own trade routes. The recent failed intervention in Korea, working in partnership with the Russians, was clearly modelled on a similar military adventures around the globe. The results have only hardened British attitudes towards that distant and mysterious power. All the more interesting is that only a decade ago both Britain and Russia were at war with each other in the Crimea. With the tacit support of the French, truly the British are not ones for making lasting friendships with anyone. Examiners note, divide and rule, the age-old adage of crown imperialism. Thank goodness for a more liberal approach, centralised, consolidated command. An isolated power. That brings us neatly to the present situation. British power has been without serious challenge for 60 years, and the Crown's willingness to stand alone has given its people a golden century of dominance and superiority. But that superiority is beginning to slip, and even subjects in the home islands are beginning to see the world has changed within their lifetimes. British power is no longer exercised so aggressively, nor can it dictate terms to foreign potentates with the same bravado attitude as before. But dominions have also become more independent, with their own governing structures and strategic concerns, but no longer openly subservient to the whims of Whitehall. Examiners note, could you expand on this point? Perhaps there is a possibility of splitting the dominions off from the Crown completely. With supremacy came complacency, and British military technology has lagged behind the other powers, even as the technological revolution brought on by the Covenant of the Enlightened has unfurled. Whilst domestic technology is as developed as anywhere else, much of the extensive military might of the Crown is based on older technologies. British naval vessels, while still sturdy and powerful, are labour-intensive affairs both in construction and operation. Tactics and military thinking have remained largely unchanged, especially in the upper echelons where aristocratic connections are sometimes valued more than military expertise. Examiners note, not a problem unique to the British, unfortunately. British leaders are unwilling to truly concede maintaining the Pax Britannica in this new world has become next to impossible at the concurrent rate of industrial and military growth. The Union of Federated American States will outstrip the British economy by the 1890s. Our own industrial output is already at 87% of that of the British. With a scant decade, even the Latin Alliance will be able to claim that its navy is at a ratio of 1 to 3 with the Royal Navy the Crown cares so much about. Examiners note, these statistics are out of date and require citation. Please revise before final submission. Land of Hope and Glory. The reality is that after decades of playing one enemy against the other, the Crown cannot afford to provoke the general war that would be required to maintain its position. Nonetheless, the British dominions remain a formidable foe, one backed into a corner and prepared to fight to the last of its preserve its gains. This explains present political situation in the British dominions. The current Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, is leader of a faction in the House of Commons known correctly as the Knights. The Knights are believers in power and glory of the Crown dominions and are willing to risk much in defending it. They are fundamentally opposed to, in principle, two most major reforms of the dominions, and are, especially amongst reactionaries, unwilling to consider that it has any flaws. For our purpose, the maintenance of a knight government be most beneficial in terms of policy. Unfortunately, the knights have several secret weapons that make them dangerous enemies. Firstly, the vast majority of British public support. The knights have done for many years. The blind assumption of superiority, now innate to the subject of the crown, ensures that the knights' policies play well in the occasional elections throughout the dominions. It also means that the knights can mobilise mass support when needed, potentially overcoming the manpower-intensive problems inherent in the crown's military. Secondly, the knights' own assumptions of superiority means they are more willing to provoke an early confrontation with a foreign enemy, assured of their own preparedness to defeat an enemy. The knights may well end up impetuously charging into a war they have little hope of winning, and yet in doing so they may also prove themselves right. By confronting its enemy now, the crown may yet buy itself some time to achieve victory, before its foes have become too technically, industrially, or militarily advanced. Examiner's notes, interesting point, encouraging the knights too much may lead to a confrontation with the crown that we are not yet ready for. Even now, there are officers in the Imperial Prussian Navy who consider open confrontation with the Royal Navy a poor strategy for much of the same reason. In short, the knights may end up creating the circumstances for which the very reforms they love to despise. By uniting the British public behind their Britannic glory rhetoric, they will tap into the greatest resource the crown has, its people. Stubborn and yet ingenious under pressure, those same people will be galvanized by the knights' patriotism to innovate, improve, and develop. In the end, the knights' own conservative instincts may actually unleash forces they cannot truly control. Fortress Britannia. The knights' preeminence, at the moment, rests on their mass support, but if they suffer another misadventure like Korea, Disraeli's government is unlikely to survive for much longer. Much like their masters, the British voter is a stubborn and mercurial beast, quick to change his or her opinions, and often likely to vote against emotion merely because it felt their support had been taken for granted. Enter William Gladstone, leader of the Rooks. Unlike their opponents, the Rooks believe the crown would be best served by a period of withdrawal and consolidation, rather than ineffectual defiance and bluster. Only by harnessing the forces of a new technology and the varied cultures and peoples of the crown's dominions can it hope to survive in this new age and modern age. The philosophy makes the Rooks dangerous in the long term, and given free rein of the British government would see them root and branch and reform, and would cut out a lot of the dead wood throughout both the administration and the military of the crown, and lead to a dangerous revitalization of its capability in the long term. Of course, such things can be overstated, but the danger is presented by Gladstone's reformist seal and is all too clear. As a case in point, the last Rook administration reformed wholesale the crown's military according to a Free Armadas review, which centralised standardised the Royal Navy, the Royal Flying Corps, and the Army into 3 fleets. The rank structure was made uniform across the 3 services, and clear lines of seniority established. The practice of buying and selling commissions was abolished above a certain grade, and military recruitment was open to individuals throughout the Crown's territories. The Dominion's reform was even more alarming. The colonial administrations of Canada, South Africa, and India were all recognised as legitimate semi-autonomous authorities with their own independent administrations and militaries, albeit under a certain element of central direction. Only a foolish attempt to expand the reforms to fractious Ireland brought Gladstone's project to a screeching halt. Luckily, the British public at the moment consider Gladstone and his colleagues as naysayers and doommongers, more interested in talking the crown and her dominions down than in truly attempting to fix the problems. As previously stated, however, this could change if the knights are unable to develop on the fiction of crown superiority indefinitely. Examiner's notes, an excellent summary of the dangers the Rooks pose in the long term. However, even in opposition, they could prove damaging. The British government has in the past shown willingness to adjust course on the fly, poaching popular policies from other quarters if necessary. How flexible are the knights in a patriotic insistence that nothing should change? Templars of the Crown. The works will need to be watched carefully, especially if they achieve power in the near future. Another aberration, however, deserves our total attention. An institution dedicated solely to the service of the Crown. The Templars are something of an oddity worldwide. Officially, they are the Royal Templars of the Round Temple, established or re-established by King George III after the loss of the American colonies. They claim, truthfully or not, it is impossible to tell to be the modern incarnation of a much older institution, whether that is needed the Round Table of Arthurian romance, or something else is unclear. Certainly, its members are officially knighted by the reigning monarch, and its symbolism is replete with esoteric meaning. It is unclear that or what, if any, relation they have with the Knights Templar of medieval Europe, although the similarities are there. Unlike the Teutonic Knights, however, the Templars make no effort to directly rule their people, and instead seem to be dedicated quite selflessly to the preservation of and reform of the Crown to make it stronger. Examiner's notes. Are you suggesting the Teutonic Knights are not selflessly dedicated to preservation and reform of the Imperium? The Templars sponsor political groups affiliated with both Knights and the Rooks, fund technological research councils and academic committees. So-called think tanks associated with Templars have been behind many of the greatest reforms and innovations in British life in the past century. Yet, the Templars of themselves take little of the credit and merely move on to the next problem. The Templars have established chapters throughout the Crown, and recently been identified as sponsoring movements throughout the Dominions, including some organisations that campaign for great autonomy for these former colonies. Exactly how encouraging such radical idea defends the Crown is unclear. Yet, there is one theory, advanced by Professor Hereford in Vienna. Examiner's note, a crank, none of his papers achieved any sufficient peer-reviewed scores to be published. Surely you do not truly agree with him. Hereford posits that Templars take a far longer-term view of strategic situation than most. Their ultimate goal is to safeguard the Crown, not preserve the British dominions in its current form. In truth, their strategy may involve killing the Crown in order to save it. Nonetheless, the Templars remain a silent but committed presence in the British daily life. Many charities working with the poor and invalid within the Crown cities rely on donations sourced from Templar funds, if indirectly channeled via other religious institutions or secular concerns. It should be noted that the Templars also commit military forces to battle as well. These units were once more likely to be support-based than frontline combatants, often medical support units or rear echelon troops working to serve the rank and file of the British land fleet. More recently, dedicated combat troops have appeared bearing the blazon of the Order of St. John, believed to come much from the Templar fortress on Malta. Such units are often fast and deadly, using speed and shield technologies to defend themselves and shelter other Crown forces. It is believed that some amongst the Templars are forecasting a violent confrontation in the near future, one which will require their own knights to participate. Examiner's note. Tour survey of the Templars is interesting, but I fail to see exactly how important it is to our overall understanding of Crown strategic identity. The Templars are a minor concern, and in the event of war, Malta will surely fall to the Teutonic Knights as planned. In conclusion, the British Crown and her dominance are a sturdy in contradictions all at once. It is both strong and weak, advancing and retreating, globally powerful and yet also unable to dictate terms. The tension at the heart of a Crown becomes more pronounced with every passing year, as its foes grow stronger and more emboldened, and as its leaders become more aware that their old certainties and prejudices no longer apply. Yet, at the same time, retention provides great reserve of strength like galvanic energy stored in a battery of a tank of RJ1027. Whilst a careful pinprick might cause the contents to leak out in a dull fizz or with a limp gurgle, but it also may trigger an explosive reaction that can consume those foolish enough to get close. This leaves us with difficult choices to make. The British Crown and her dominions are, like a wounded lion, pitiable in its agony, and yet still possessed of great and terrible strength. Do we provoke it? Walking into a proverbial lion's den, as Daniel did of old? Will it lie down, accept the end, or savage us with all the ferocity of a master predator? Or do we stay at a distance and let its strength ebb away and risk allowing it time to heal, return stronger than ever? Examiner's note. Far too heavy on the metaphors, nonetheless a good way of summarizing your appraisal, even it is too flawed for my tastes. Final examiner's remarks. A strong essay that summarizes and identifies the main themes in Crown history, while you draw some excellent strategic and political commentary out of the historical details and provide a good overall of the modern political realities as well. Dwelling on the Templars is unnecessary. They are a romanticized curio, not a genuine institution, whatever the similarities to the Teutonic Knights. Your description of secret weapons of the Knights and your final summary, metaphors aside, are standout pieces of analysis. The Crown is both ready to fall and yet still a terrifying foe. We cannot be certain of beating yet. Moderator score 77. My dear Oberst, thank you for directing this young man to my attention. Regrettably, he will no longer be attending your class in the future. Rest assured, however, that his brilliant mind will be of service to the Imperium in a different capacity. Neil Obstead, General Field Marshal Stock, Knight Commander of the Luminary Right.